I'm excited to be back here at Voice Talks today. And for this segment, I'm going to be chatting with a couple of folks who are GDEs, which are Google Developer Experts for Google Assistant. And we'll be chatting about implementing a few design tips from conversational actions that Wally mentioned earlier in the show. But first, let's meet our GDEs that we have today. Allen, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey there. Thanks for having me. I'm Allen Firstenberg. I am a GDE for the Google Assistant and a number of other Google technologies. And I am an engineer at Objective Consulting.
Hello, everyone. My name is Denis Valášek. I'm co-founder at Yadada, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thanks. I just love the company name. It always makes me giggle whenever you mention it. So, what we're going to be doing today is I have 3 design topics that Wally mentioned earlier that I want us to talk about a little bit more, and also in the vein of how, as a developer, you would be implementing these conversation designs as well. So we're going to start off with the one that Wally mentioned about the TTS, or text-to-speech, not necessarily matching what is shown on the screen, specifically in the use case of using interactive canvas, where you have a screen, and so that text is different than what the actual action auditorially will tell you. The use case that he gave was when an action is asking for maybe several questions, that the audio would say something to the effect of like, great job, let's move on to the next question, and then say the question, versus the screen just showing the question. And so my question to both of you is, how would you implement this type of functionality? And let's start off with Dennis first.
Sure. So for every response, simple response, you can use the speech and text parameters, where you can specify text and speech separately. So for example, you can show some text and then you can play some speech to the user, customize with it SSML, and so on. You can specify this either in the actions in Google webhook or in your action builder project using YAML or JSON.
Yeah, oh my gosh, I love using SSML, especially when you're adding like fun little audio things as well. That's for me, it's like the very creative space of voice development.
One of the things that I like to think about when I'm designing the visuals to go along with the audio is that I can sometimes make use of lists. So there will be times when I may not want to read out a list of things, but I will want to show on the screen those kind of lists or options or buttons, depending on exactly what makes sense. So that's a really powerful tool, is to have something both said to you, but then have the display showing you those lists.
Oh my gosh, totally. I could even imagine, like, there's some use cases, at least for myself, where I have a hard time pronouncing certain words. I'm dyslexic. And so those type of options where you could just touch the screen and it's just like you said it is really helpful. But how does the Canvas app know that? Like, is there a connecting kind of tool or feature with interactive Canvas that can translate that touch into that?
Sure. One of the great things about the interactive canvas is that it's just HTML and JavaScript. So when the user touches the screen at a point, it's handled just like any other JavaScript touch event, which is really great. Then as part of your event handler, there are interactive canvas functions which let you send a text query back to the server, just as if the user had said exactly that word or some word that you set it for. So your button can trigger this call, and it looks to your webhook like the user said something.
Okay, so my next question that I have is, when building for an action, how do you handle different things like gradings or instructions on how to use your action when it comes to new visitors or new users versus your returning users? Because I know for me personally, when I'm first playing with an action, I want to have a better sense of what to do. But once I've played with it, it seems tedious. So how would you handle that? And let's start off with Allen first.
So one of the nice things is that the assistant will provide the last time that a user has visited your action. And it's part of the JSON that is sent to you, and you can read this in your library. If that field isn't there, well, this is their first time visiting you, so you know whether it's their first time or whether they're a repeating user. You can also tell from that how long it's been since they were last there. So, if it's been a while, that can be useful as well sometimes. Additionally, there are a number of libraries such as Jovo and Multivocal that store additional information. So not just when was the last time they were there, but how many times have they visited you? And this is just stored in the regular user storage object. So it's always available again. And this gives you the ability to say, okay, let me give a long message their first time and a slightly shorter messages or, welcome back summary messages for subsequent times. But when they're old pros, when they've been there 10, 20 times, then they just want to get right down to business. Let's just get into the game. Let's get going. And you can make a nice, short introduction for those folks.
Yeah, I love that because things, those libraries that support how frequent, like the frequency, is really important because just because someone visited you yesterday doesn't mean that they're not new. So being able to have those two data points can really give a better experience for your users.
It's really a fantastic way to just feel more personalized to the user, that the user really believes that you're comfortable with them, and that helps make them more comfortable with you.
And other great customization points might be to inform them about their progress they perhaps set up the last time, or you can also learn how they go through your action and say, okay, do you want the same as the last time? Should I just repeat that? And customize their path through your action so it's even more seamless the next time they visit you.
Ooh, how do you do that? Like, how do you keep track of that?
So you can either store visited intents. This would be much more complex if done right, but just the simple version. You can store the necessary parameters either in the user storage, or you can use some external database like Firestore to store the user information and then deploy some custom logic based on that, so you know what's the optimal path for this specific user.
Yeah, it's almost like giving your action like memory, almost like to remember where your user has been, kind of figuring out those user journeys that they might be interested in. That sounds great. Okay, so I'm really excited for my last question because it's a little controversial in like the conversation design space. So for those who are not familiar of like the 3 strike rules when it comes to fallback intents, or no match intents. Which means that an intent doesn't get matched. And so this is like the else statement of intents. And kind of what is practice is after the 3rd time a user experiences this consecutively, you want to end your conversation or your action gracefully. Acknowledge, there's been an error, and close this out. But while I was mentioning that potentially for games specifically, that you might not want to follow that. And instead of ending gracefully, you might want to choose a functionality or the option for the user for them. So my question is for you two is a lot of platforms, including Actions on Google, we have these kind of baked into the platform. So how do you handle this? If you want to implement after the 3rd time a user has hit a no match intent to pivot them to another part of the conversation or to continue the interaction?
Sure. So in these decision-making points, it's crucial to know what are you making the decision about. If it's something simple, like going left or right, it's perfectly fine to just pick for the user either by some predefined state or just picking at random. But if it's something more personal, like a user's name, it would be kind of weird and disruptive for the whole experience to just pick something at random if the user didn't have anything to say about it. It's also nice to distinguish between if you didn't hear anything for the smart speakers or if you just didn't understood. So those are 2 separate intents, system level intents in actions on Google. It's the no match and no input. For each of them, in the console, you can set up the webhook and the actions that should be triggered from those webhooks. So you get the levels if it's the 1st, 2nd, or the 3rd call, and you can just specify your logic based on that. And that event can trigger your webhook, and from there you just have to keep the state of the action, what are you making the decision about, and decide and also acknowledge it to the user. You should always say to the user, hey, I picked for you, because otherwise they might get lost.
handling no match or avoiding the usual no match intent can be pretty tricky. And it seems kind of convoluted, but it is possible to avoid. So the trick that I always use for this is in Action Builder, I will create a type that I'll call the any type. And this type I explicitly set to have free form text matching. So what this means is anything at all will match this text. I then create an intent. And for the sample phrases of this intent, I will put in, a phrase, but I will make sure that it matches to a parameter, which I call the any parameter, that has this any type. So this way, basically any free-form text can trigger this intent. Then for the scenes that I want to make sure this gets handled incorrectly, I will make this one of my developer-based custom intents. So I'll use the any match intent for this and hand that off to a webhook. Then as part of the webhook, I need to keep count of how many times it's been invoked in a row. And again, fortunately, there are libraries like Multivocal, which can handle or help handle that for me by saving that counter in the session object. This way, I can now, if I want to end it after 4 attempts, I can make decisions to do it at that point. I'm not bound by this 1, 2, and 3 choke points, basically.
Of course, whenever we are chatting, we generally chat for hours and hours, but unfortunately we can't do that today. We are time bound by our segment, but I would love for you both to share how people can find you online. That way, if they want to learn more about you and what you're doing, they can follow you.
People can follow me at Firstenberg on Twitter. I also have a podcast called Two Voice Devs, which you can find on various podcast platforms and on YouTube. And in Two Voice Devs, I work with my co-host, Mark Tucker, and we kind of explore these same kind of questions. How do we take things that we should be doing, and how do we actually do them?
You can find me on Twitter at Denis Valášek, and you can also check out Yadada at yadada.app. Thanks for having us.
I love it. Thank you both for hanging out with me and sharing with me your tips and tricks on how you would implement these conversation designs. And I hope that you folks at home enjoyed this month's Ask the Expert segment. And back to Sophia.